Hello, everybody, and welcome along to this lecture today in aggression and sports psychology. Aggression in sports psychology is one of them really hot topics. Players, institutes, people across the world often wonder what it is that creates certain tasks and manipulations for people. Why do players overly act aggressive in certain situations and others don't? Is there a silver bullet or a panacea, a one all fits explanation to aggression in sports psychology? And today we'll study and understand all of the mechanisms and strategies that people can use around being overtly aggressive in situations that may contravene the rules or the moral implications of games. Aggression, of course, is a feature of us as a species, one that has probably allowed us to develop, grow, and be part of the fittest gene pool in today's times. Aggression as well can be seen as a good thing and have a very positive relationship to high or adequate levels of arousal when performing in sport and sports psychology. Moving through, we will go through some of the very, very prominent examples of how aggression is seen within sport. The first question that I'd always ask students or people when we're trying to develop an understanding of a topic is, what is aggression, or what is the actual topic we're studying? If you were to try and put it down on paper or put your answers into a chat function or into a piece of paper that you were going to discuss with the rest of the group, what's the best way for you to do that, and what's the most accurate measurement of what we could describe aggression is? So classification in terms of sports psychology realms is that aggression is any behavior that's intended to harm another individual by physical or verbal means. Any form of behavior directed toward the goal of harm or injuring a human being with who is motivated to avoid such harm. So again, there's the role of the individual in this, in Bull's example, and also in Barron's. So both pretty good examples of what we see it. Noting also some tiny differences or intricacies. The fact it can be both verbal or physical comes into the actual overall constructs that we're seeing. So if I was to say to you, can you think of some, if not all, the different elements that are related to something like aggression? If you were to try and list some of them, what are the type of things that you'd come up with? And what are the answers that you'd put down onto the sheet then if you were trying to understand where it was associating from? The nature of the game. By nature, some sports are more physically intended to cause injury, or that can cause injury, as opposed to other games as well. Hostile crowds. Crowds can obviously have an effect on people and how they react in certain situations. Home teams and away teams can both be cited in these situations as causing negative responses from athletes, players, and, as we always say, people. That's the main one as well, that we're honing in on that side of it for people as well. What's actually happening with these people, that they are acting, or should I say, in many cases, reacting in certain ways as well. So that will be an element that we look at going forward as well, as we develop more of an understanding, and a grounded level of understanding too, is what I would suggest. Frustration caused by poor performance. This can happen where we take it out on the opposition, we take it out on referees, as I've said, we take it out on our teammates or our coaches. So it can have a very dispositional sense here, that it's not always towards one set of people or one set of spectators, or even one person that maybe you've got a grudge on your team. That could be an element there that you'd need to have a discussion, and really a coach, a head coach, somebody who's good with observation should have some idea of how to see that, what way they see that, and then what way they react to it then again. So that is a part of the coaching structure for management, in my opinion, as well. Wide division between scores. If it's starting to get embarrassing for one team as opposed to another, it can definitely cause issues. It can definitely cause problems, and it can definitely incite acts of aggression that will harm, that will have the intention to harm others then as well. And that can be, lead to injuries, long-term injuries for people as well. So there is two sides to it as well. So venue, as I said, the away team. If you're an away team, there could be hostility from a crowd, booing you, slagging you off, and again, there are other instances where people cross the line too often, and with too what you would say abuse is abuse, but actually there is levels of abuse, and you would have to be cognizant of the fact. For example, David Beckham, once cites he received abuse after an England defeat in a European Championship, and they were singing about his child passing away and stuff like that. So there are definitely really distinct levels within sports, and maybe, when you look at aggression, look at the actual impact or the influence of the crowd, and sometimes the issues, as we would have seen with maybe the Stanford Prison Experiment or some of the other stuff, is that actually when we have anonymity, when we can hide behind something, people start to act in I would say very different ways, that could cause or will cause pain and harm to others, and believe that they're absolved of any consequence because simply it's within sport. Previously developed grudges are scores to settle. So again, derby games, competitions between teams that are closely aligned, are linked, etc. That could come into it. That could come into it as well. High levels of arousal. Coaches sometimes make the mistake, as I quite I'd say famously say now, because I say it so often. The Braveheart speech before a competition can often lead to people being over aroused going into competition and then causing themselves to be sent off due to something. A straight red card in soccer, or Gaelics, rugby, etc. And then obviously you've got extrinsic rewards at the end of that. Success in a competition could be the difference between getting a new contract. Success and playing well in a competition could be the difference between people who are maybe really, really close to getting a scholarship or keeping a scholarship within a university that they'll need to go to college the next year. So there's definitely what I would call different levels and different realms to it. So they have to be kept in mind, and they have to be observed to the best of the ability. And again, I'm not gonna lie about this. I really, really think that there's an element that the coach needs to get on board with this as well, and think of some of these key things that can be done. Famously, coaches have spoken about how, you can't take that fire out of a player. I'm not sure how many coaches would accept that as a reason if they lost a World Cup final, an All-Ireland final, a Heineken Cup final, with a player getting sent off just because we believe that that's just the nature of the player. There are definitely personalised informations for players and certain personality characteristics. That's fine, we accept that. But do we believe completely that we cannot change or we cannot affect them in any way? I would certainly say that that's something we'd need to question ourselves, because the research is telling us in 9 out of 10 cases there definitely is stuff that we can do to at least help with coping, or should I say strategies to cope in situations, highly stressful situations, should I say, highly stressful situations. So aggression in sport, it's often displayed in sport and sometimes boils over into unmitigated displays of violence, often implicitly or explicitly advocated by spectators, coaches, and even cite reasonable provocation or justification. You'd like to believe it was a long time since we really looked at sport in the sense that justification. Oh well, they kicked me first. So I would suggest that I thought we were past them times. Being honest, I thought we were past them, and you know, advocation and provocation of these things are probably important, but there are definitely ways and means around them, is what I'd be saying. So we can look into that, and we can try and understand it with a bit more detail than maybe we have at the moment on these things. So much media attention is placed on displays of aggression, usually high moral grounds. We see an athlete, a previous athlete, somebody who might have been a role model in terms of their success as an athlete. And the example I'd often give is that, in Ireland, Roy Keane is a great example of a role model. Now, Roy Keane was on TV during the week. I seen a clip of him talking about how he said he wants his goalkeeper acting with violence, and being able to take control of a situation. Now, look, probably just misuse of words and miscommunication by him, but that's probably a great example of being overly aggressive in a situation that realistically, I can't see it ending anyway, but on a negative thing then again. So the media can and will, in many cases, perpetuate these things. So that side of it's that side of it can play a role too. Why do players resort to aggressive? So here's some questions around it then again. Why do players maybe resort? What's the kind of way to put it is, how are they, why do players resort to aggression and violent conduct when they know they'll be penalised? What's your idea behind that? Why is that? Why do we feel that, or what it is, and that's a major role within it, within the constructs of it as well. So that's part of how we have to take it on board. Why do coaches defend their players when they can clearly see that such acts of aggression is counterproductive to where they want to be? Is it just simply that they wish to meet the middle ground of being closer to what it is that they believe to be the adequate amount of aggression needed to win games? It's a dangerous place to be, and a scary place, because if coaches start to condone it, if coaches start to jump upon it, we know by Albert Bandura, we know by the Bobo, we know social learning, that if they do that, they're probably likely to mimic that role and behaviour that the athletes have undertaken too. So they're all big parts of it that really need to be developed and looked upon. And I think we just need to make sure that we can, at the very minimum, keep as much of what we understand about aggression and the dangers of it at the forefront of our colleagues' minds, i.e. our coaches. And then, as I said, what role does the media play in perpetuating such aggression? These really highly irrational comments like, excuse me, this game is a do or die game. It's a do or die, and in order for us to be successful or be good people, we need to win this game, when we know that that's not true in any way, shape or form. Violent or aggravated behaviours are not necessarily aggression, e.g. anger, angry gestures, equipment abuse. So, you might hear stuff in the past in relation to why a certain player has acted a certain way. Their substitute, they get out, they actually kick a water bottle or kick the screen. And aggression is a set of behaviours that are likely to or have the potential to cause harm on others, and they're intended to cause harm. Now listen, it's because somebody's in the way of a goal-related activity, and that can be a dangerous part of it as well. So let's have a look at the types of aggression. So looking at the types of aggression then, what we're going to come across is these different types, these different styles, and these are the ones that are kind of I would say now starting to show themselves a little bit more in mainstream, because we've got a lot more people who are involved in sport and exercise psychology, people who are more interested for the first time maybe in sport and exercise psychology. And this is why you probably have heard these terms in the past and maybe have an idea of what they are, but probably not completely clear on how they actually insert themselves into mainstream or top level sport then again. Coaches often want players to display more aggression in their play. What they mean in psychological terms is that they want to see more assertive behaviours, and assertive behaviours reflect behaviours that are physically ferocious but do not contravene the rules, nor do they intend to harm. Rather, they aim at imposing influence and dominance. Now, excuse me, every year students from boxing backgrounds, rugby backgrounds will often question this part, and I don't know. I've spoken to a couple of really top end boxing coaches who've been involved in the high performance unit within boxing and how they've achieved things, achieved gold medals, etc. And actually, they're big believers in assertive behaviors, because they actually think that, going down the aggression route, oh, you have to be aggressive if you want to win a boxing match. You have to have that physical aggression if you're going to. But this kind of level is that you can have a ferocious element to what you do and be very intent on what you do, but you don't really always have to intend. I mean, there's going to be harm and people are going to get hurt in boxing, MMA, etc. But maybe it's more towards the concept of, imposing or creating dominance and influence. So, aggression in sport then, some assertive behaviours are tolerated by officials in sports, such as the haka, the provocative display by the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. Of course, it's not solely done by them, nor was it started by them. But anyway, other behaviours that are violent but are neither assertive, aim to influence/dominate, nor aggressive, intent to harm are tolerated. Bad language, equipment abuse. So, the question that I'd often say to students, or I'd ask students, would be this one, would be, should the haka actually be allowed in rugby? What are the potential problems by allowing the haka to take place within rugby? And then, does every country have a right for a cultural display pre-game? So again, it's a very difficult question to answer, but everybody seems to have their own opinion on it, which is fine. And with that said, it always garners some really good debate then again. So looking at some of the two other types of aggression that we kind of hear so often, it's coming from Silva's work within clinical-based psychology, of course. Hostile aggression has the primary goal of injuring another person or player, e.g. the response to provocation, high emotional arousal, usually spontaneous. And then instrumental aggression has intent to harm another, but with the subordinate goal to achieve an outcome that is beneficial to the player or team, e.g. planned or calculated aggressive acts. Hostile aggression supersedes other goals of the sport, such as scoring points or goals, and usually distracts players from their role in the team. E.g., again, we're coming back to Roy Keane. He has this quotation: "I'd waited long enough. I hit him effing hard. The ball was there, I think. Take that, you see. I didn't wait for Mr. Ellery to show the card. I turned and walked to the dressing room." And here's a really good example of the types of aggression in this little trigram that we have here. At the top, assertive behaviours, bottom left, hostile, and then bottom right, we've instrumental aggression. You can see the differences in them. Assertive behaviour, not really an intention to harm. It's done with legitimate force, unusual effort, and an energy expenditure. Hostile then, intent to harm, goal to harm, unusual effort, and energy expenditure. Instrumental aggression, intent to harm, goal to win, but there isn't a source of anger involved in it. So a more focused, cold, calculated method while playing or competing within the sport as well. Okay, so continuing on there, Silva's model, obviously it illustrates the core feature of each type of aggression, and it does also illustrate that there's some ambiguity in all three. As we said before, it would be nice to be able to throw in the likes of them mixed martial arts type of sports, or boxing, or anything that actually has a large proportion of physical nature in it. So where again the question may be, where does the kind of type of gamesmanship, so performing behaviours that aren't illegitimate according to the rules, but are considered unsportsmanlike. Tennis coach instructing players to hit the ball at the opponent, or sledging in cricket, for example. So we look at some of the theories that are based within it then again in aggression, and these are theories that you probably will see and will definitely see when your examination begins. You will definitely see these theories again, or you will be certainly questioned around these theories again. The first one's quite an old one. First thing that always struck me when I started studying this as somebody who had a passion and you know, a love for history, I kind of just thought, wow, Second World War, dollar that all, trying to understand where frustration and aggression comes from. So, look, the aggression is the product of an anger response to frustration of goals and desires. Aggression directed to perceived source of frustration, e.g., hockey players' aim of scoring goals is frustrated due to lack of service from her wing players, but also marked out of the game by opponents, may lead to her to assault the mark and defender out of frustration. However, competitive environments lead to lots of frustration, but seldom is that expressed in terms of aggression or aggressive acts. When we revisited this frustration aggression theory, it combines elements of the original but also with social learning. So, according to the theory, it's widely held view that although frustration does not lead straight or directly to aggression, it increases the likelihood of aggression by increasing arousal and anger. So the drive to the goal, or the need to win something, what's the obstacle in the way of it? Can it cause frustration? If it can it lead to aggression? Okay, but it can also lead to success or punishment, and does that lead back into frustration as well? The revised one also tells us that the diagram below depicts the aggression process based on Berkowitz's model. First, the individual becomes frustrated in some way, perhaps by losing a game or playing poorly. Then increased arousal, usually in the form of anger or pain, results from frustration. And then aggression will not automatically result, and increased arousal and anger lead to aggression only if the individual has learned that it's appropriate to be aggressive in such situations. So again, the frustration is failure, goal blockage, let's say, increased arousal, pain and anger occurs, socially learned cues, appropriateness of aggression, and then aggression of and in itself. The revised frustration aggression theory is currently one of the most popular theories of aggression. When people perceive that they are being prevented from achieving a goal, their frustration is likely to turn to aggression. The closer you get to a goal, the greater the excitement and expectation of the pleasure is. Thus, the closer you are, the more frustrated you get by being held back. Unexpected occurrence of the frustration also increases the likelihood of aggression. 2. Social learning theory, Albert Bandura, the Bobo doll experiment. So again, the Bobo doll experiment, children likely to see something and mimic it then again. Imitation and vicarious experiences during childhood may So this is the one as well, is that like very rarely will you see it in a sport like soccer, let's say, for example, where you could have 30, 40, 50,000 players singing around the referees, lifestyle, sexual orientation, and then children growing up believe and see that this is okay to do with, adults maybe who they see as significant others, or more knowledgeable others, as Vygotsky would call them, accepting that. Explain the social circumstances under which violent aggressive acts might arise. The Bandura et al. In 1961, children watched an adult playing with a Bobo doll. It's a 5-foot inflated plastic doll. Experience of aggressive behaviour, personal and observed. Previous success with aggressive behaviours in terms of fulfilling personal goals. The expected pattern of reinforcement of aggression, rewarded or punishment. Psychologically, personality, and environmental then all come into it. Application of theory, Russell, 1979, hero selection and fans. Interviews and archival data found that goals scored but also penalties conceded were influential in selection. Media coverage perhaps enhances this reputation, which made such behaviours integral to perceived success, but no link between aggressive displays in supporter teams and aggressive behaviour in fans. Connolly in 1988 suggested that modelling aggressive behaviours may help non-assertive players. So actually seeing, assertive acts may help them start to perform them acts themselves. Modeling may therefore help coaches enhance the assertiveness of players, but should be used in conjunction with education and information on the distinction between aggressive and assertive behaviours. 3. Personality and individual differences. Little evidence between one single personality trait that characterizes an aggressive personality. Agreeableness, consistently and negatively linked with aggression. Agreeableness is personality dimension linked to maintaining positive and harmonious social relationships. Zuckerman et al. In 93 says isolated and aggressiveness, hostility personality trait. So no link between trait and aggressive behaviours in sport. So it's not as simple as saying, oh well, it's within the player. There is definitely a nurture element to it, and what is that nurture element doing to us? What is it leading to, and what type of information is it pushing towards when we're trying to learn on these things then again, or at least put ourselves forward in the platform of learning that as well. These are all elements and distinctions of things that will come forward for us that need to be explored. And I would certainly suggest once explored, it will definitely give us a more concrete idea. Type A personalities are seen as highly competitive, driven, extroverted individuals. They're seen and tend to be attracted to sport because of the nature of win-lose and time constraints, etc. Situational then is competitive or frustrating environments may interact with personality factors of a type A to foster aggressive behaviour. So the situation they're put in might not be maybe time present, time conscious, time awareness. So personality affects criticized as they tend to downplay the situation. Social cognitive variables such as group norms, group cohesion, and self-efficacy can mitigate personality effects. The catharsis hypothesis then, so having the ability to, or having something within our structure, within our daily lives, to be able to decrease any of this stuff across the board is a really important important factor. You know, for me, I would certainly suggest that the feeling of release after emotion expressed in experience, often thought that aggression assists in the process of helping express pent-up frustration, and often held belief that aggression in sport serves as cathartic purpose is the cathartic hypothesis. It believes it's prevalent, so found that viewers of aggressive sports believe that this made them personally less aggressive. So sometimes viewing it can have a cathartic expression of maybe like a little pump valve, and it's just letting out air little by little, maybe in some cases letting it out all at the one time. There is little evidence though. There is very little evidence, particularly within sport, and we've got to go back to Bushman et al.'s piece of work in 1999 that said gave students a pro-catharsis essay and an essay subjected to criticisms by others unseen. It also participants were more likely to choose a punchbag task afterward and administering punishment to other students. So really, the punchbag phenomenon or look that Bushman looked at, cathartic hypothesis is a belief rather than an effect. So it's something that could be there, and it's only a construct. It's only a representation of that. It's not something that's empirical, but maybe it is something that we can use to release some frustration that we may have, or that we may need to have then as well going forward. Okay, so for me, I would say, important, relatively important, and relatively and massively important is men are likely to engage in aggressive behaviours. Men are also more likely to display aggressive attitudes and beliefs. Gender, this may be due to elevated levels of androgens, testosterone, evolutionary benefit to aggression in terms of status and dominance, socialization of aggressive tendencies during development, so majority of aggressive acts in sport are committed by men and it's more endorsed by men. You can see in the little one here in relation to gender crimes, let's say within the US, which would be more clinical based, so we're not going to spend too much time on this. Gender, young girls tend to express higher levels of moral behaviour in sport and rate such behaviours as virtuous. Females do endorse aggressive behaviours if the group norm endorses it. Females are much less likely to engage in verbal and physical aggressive behaviour than men, but are more equally likely to engage in verbal assault as men. Morality issues then. Social identity theory states that people in groups tend to forego their personal attitudes and beliefs and assume those of the group. We spoke about people who are, maybe caught in anonymity. Um, that would be a big thing. Um, I would say going forward more so maybe than we're looking at here now. So, in the group, aggressive acts can therefore be tolerated or condoned if the norm permits it. Okay, it can only be condoned if it's permitted, if that makes sense for us. Like, it has to be permitted and accepted then again. Brudemister and Shields then found basketball players gave fewer pro-social, more egocentric reasons to moral dilemmas in sport. So, again, arousal is heightened with physical exertion and remains elevated for a while thereafter. Evidence suggests that such arousal may be misinterpreted as anger or frustration, Zilleman et al., and then feelings of anger may be evaluated in other sports then again. Hormones and steroid abuse. Listen, we've come across this quite often, haven't we? We've come across it quite often where we're wondering what is the relationship between steroid abuse and let's say things around ideas and concept of over-aggression, or how can it relate or go back to certain things that could have a detrimental effect to us then again going forward. Collective aggressive behaviour is prevalent in sport, particularly among crowds. In certain sports seems to be very prevalent, association football, but some sports are more almost completely immune to it. Like cricket, you would very rarely hear something like that, to be honest with you. I would say so. It would be very rare that you find something like that then again. So that side of it is prominent and important as well. It's hard to see then again going forward. Okay, so the next one is the Frunquist then found a direct negative correlation between homicide and suicide rates and success in local sports teams, cited in between the 1970s and 1990s. Again, that's okay. I wouldn't be too worried about that. I wouldn't be too worried about it. It's probably something that we'd be aware of, but also something that's probably not too worrying either, So, suggested broken promises theory, frustration of unfulfilled hopes of sports teams led to social manifestations to those negative emotions. People who maybe thought they were going to be able to make it, believed that they were going to make it, and maybe thought they'd have a not just a very early career, but as it says there, it's the broken promises theory, which leads to this kind of worry, concern, or issues. And that's what happens when coaches build up young players who believe they'll have a lifelong career in sport, when the reality is they probably won't, the majority. Collective aggression is violent, or unified behaviour displayed by a group or crowd of people. So, for me, crowd violence, a form of collective aggressive among sports supporters or fans, and hooliganism then again is a great question in relation to universal ideas around these type of things. Social identity theory, SIT, aims to describe mechanisms by which groups influence individuals' behaviours. Individuals forego their identity. Sorry, I've just gone forward there. Sorry. They forego their identity and assume the attitudes, beliefs, expectations, and norms of the group. It's a process that we would call de-individuation. Now, for sports psychology students, as opposed to sport, to psychology or clinical or applied psychology students, they would probably be very aware of this term, because it's probably seen throughout terms with the Stanford prison experiment, where Philip G. Zimbardo, of course, talks around this de-individuation process. Things like, stripping them of their names, which is a very prominent thing to us, a very big part of our personality, stripping them of any dignity, they have to answer to a number as opposed to a name in any way, form, or shape, and also this dehumanizing or de-individuation that they are now just part of something, and there is no part of them that's I anymore. Individuals self-stereotype themselves as typical group members, members from the in-group, us viewed as unequivocally positively outgroups them. So it's we see this in sport. Good coaches, great coaches, some of the best coaches of all time have used siege mentality. Sir Alex Ferguson, very much noted as being one of them coaches who has done that. We versus them, the world is against us, and how and why that's happened. Then again, is a big part of it. Excuse me, a big part of it, and that will kind of create a very high level of aggression, particularly when losing, because it's not just that you're losing a sporting venture, it's not just losing that you're losing a sporting contest or game. It's much greater than that. It's much bigger than that. The reason being is that actually it's making out like these people actually hate us. They really are against us. They are our enemies. Now, we have to think of that rationally. Sport is sport. Do we love sport? Yes. Can we get caught up in the we versus them or I versus them? We can, and it can lead to very positive outcomes for sports in terms of success. But in most cases, it leads to very negative or detrimental outcomes. Sport by nature, yes, do or die, yeah, okay, it could create a situation where you're very successful for the rest of your life, or you could be caught in a situation where you're remembered for maybe making an error in a final or a cup competition like that. Then again, this can lead to prejudice and discrimination towards outgroup members, which, by all rights, as you can imagine, is very dangerous. Collective aggression, and so I, for one, wanted out from being a jug-eared, bespectacled suburban twerp once in a while. I knew it wasn't me that made people hurry off to the other side of the road. It was us, and I was part of that, an organ in the hooligan body. So Nick Hornby's famous book called Fever Pitch, course made and represented in different movies. Movies these days, in relation to hooliganism. Then again, so this individuals behave less as individuals and more as group members may result in an expression of values and behaviours not normally expressed. Individual responsibility for actions is reduced as anonymity is pronounced in a group situation. In sports situation, violence is seldom seen. Aggressive behaviours, threats and displays are often sufficient to galvanise in a group cohesiveness and self-esteem. Stott et al. In 2001 examined aggression and violence at Euro 2000 Association Football Tournament. Collectively, aggression determined by context, confrontation with the outgroup, opposition fans, and collective norms, shared attitudes towards opposition fans. Stott suggests that the relationship between collective identity and environment is reciprocal, and it is partly determined by context. It can result in escalation of aggressiveness displayed, in which might lead to actual displays of violence. So the concept around that, is it always going to lead to physical acts of aggression, physical acts of violence? Not necessarily is the answer. We would love to have some sort of one in, all in rule that we could say, use it as I suggested at the start, a panacea, a silver bullet, a one answer fits all. And we will rarely get that in most things that we visit within our lives. We will rarely get that. So therefore, what do we need to do? Or how do we need to do it to understand and garner more understanding around these things that are there going forward as well? So they are big parts of it. There's a social identity theory. So if we were to look at some of the more clinical, if we were to go into some of the more clinical theories of aggression and revisit them across the spectrum of sport, I wonder what we'd find. So the instinct theory, or the trait perspective, proposed by Freud but developed by Lorenz in 1966, is aggression is genetically inherited, and that the trait of violence lies within everybody due to a basic instinct to dominate. Freud called it the death instinct, a want, a desire, a hunger, that we all want to die at some stage, that we have a purpose to serve on this earth. Of course we do, but we also have a death wish, a desire, a hunger to eventually die. And maybe that's what pushes us into these highly controversial situations, or these highly erratic situations where violence tends to occur quite often with athletes and human beings, as I would say. So, as we push forward then, aggressive energy is constantly building up and it needs to be released. So what way do we do that? How do we actually release aggression? What's the best way to release aggression? Well, there are things that we're going to go and develop now as we go forward. Aggression in sport then. So if we look at this, these little ducklings, Lorenz actually had hatched when they were babies, and he had treated them in almost a maternal sense. The ducklings actually would follow him everywhere, and it is a type of social learning and aggression that Lorenz found within it then again. Social learning theory, Albert Bandura, which we've gone through, the further developed by Leakey. I would suggest you go and have a look at some of the research concerned in relation to Leakey, because there's much more development on the social learning theory. I think quite often, myself included, we can get caught up social learning theory. The only person ever to do social learning theory is Albert Bandura. No, but Albert Bandura's work is fruitful and definitely worthwhile investigating and developing. Although, with a big caveat to that, let's take a look at the work of Leakey. So learn by watching and copying role models, and it becomes an expected mode of behaviour. The frustration aggression hypothesis would more clearly, now as we've developed and we've grown and we've looked more fruitfully towards the future of aggression theory, aggression theory, now we are more aware that actually it's an interactionist perspective. So there's a role of the person within it, a highly important role of the person within it, and frustration develops when goal-directed behavior or the NASH is blocked. So what is it that's in the way of the person? What is that goal that they want to achieve? How is that blocked? It's instinctive to fulfill the need to release frustration. We all let it build. We all have things in life. It becomes difficult. It becomes hard. We don't always have the answers to the questions that we wish to achieve. So that's where we get stuck. That's where we get caught. And what way do we go around it? Aggression equals successful. If we're successful with our aggression, then we consider it to be cathartic. If we're unsuccessful, we get sent off, a red card, the referee, gets at us, blah, blah, blah. Well, the flip side of that then means that we are probably going to incur more frustration as we sit in the changing room as the team continues its quest to win the game. But we've been sent off and we've let the team down. So therefore, that role of aggression within sport and the frustration aggression hypothesis, very, very simplistic, often frowned upon, but of course within psychology and within research, we like to believe that critical thinking is the most important thing. And it's very, very important, let me tell you that, very important, because we want a high level of empiricism, we want a high level of learning. Yes, absolutely we do. But do not forget that sometimes it might be the heuristic element to it. The heuristic, or Occam's razor, the simplest way forward is probably the best way forward as well in many of them cases, or many of them situations, many of them situations, should I say there. So, we move on now again. Interaction perspective, it builds upon Dollard's work and it leads to increase in arousal, which in some situations will result in aggression. If we're highly emotional, highly aggressive, or we're highly emotional, it can lead to high levels of aggression. And when it does lead to them high levels of aggression, it can have like a cue. Baseball bats, violent acts being witnesses, nature of the game, triggered aggression if arousal is high. Best players have ability and temperament to control frustration and aggression. And this is the problem that we have. We have outliers in every single sport. We have the athlete who doesn't need to train all the time. We have the athlete who doesn't need to eat all healthy food consistently and constantly to perform. We are constantly going to have outliers, but we can only work towards the majority. We can only tell you that in most cases, it's probably going to lead to a negative outcome if we act in a certain way, let's say, for example. Okay, so what do we do, or what can we do to deter or pull ourselves away from that? What are the type of things that we can do to help deter or pull ourselves away from that then again? Self-control of aggression then, response prevention training, the RPT training. This involves developing a plan to deal with problem situations. Unfortunately, coaches a lot of the time neglect this, and when they neglect it, all that happens is when the athlete goes into a real game situation and they've never come across this previously, they act in a certain way. They respond in a certain way. They feel that they're aggrieved and annoyed by the referee. They feel like they're peed off by the referee. They may put it down as something that's natural, but actually you can train this. Again, all the time, constantly saying it. You're probably blue in the face of hearing me saying it. Mental skills are like physical skills. In order to get better at the mental skills, you've got to train them like the physical skills. So these are all really, really, really important things, important constructs, that we need to be aware of. Anyway, the athlete and the coach should identify situations that have led to aggression in the past. What they should do next then is develop strategies that will help you avoid behaving aggressively. Once that's completed and done, then we can move forward to something else. Okay, we can move forward to something else, or something a little bit different then again. Okay, so when we do that, when we get around to doing that, that's kind of closer to where we need to be, or what it is that we need to do in order to do that. So, self-control of aggression. We have got these three phases that, again, if we work upon these three phases, we can get closer to as an athlete, we can get closer to as a person. And when we do that, it's actually much more fruitful for us. So what would we do in these phases, I'm often asked? Well, let's have a little look at that now. In this preparation phase, it's a really important one, of course. The player must prepare mentally before the competition. Self-talk can relax the player in specific phrases like, if I keep my cool, I'll perform better. If I'm ready for the competition, if I'm cool, if I've got the calmness, if I'm not overly aggressive, if I'm not overly avert, I'll be able to perform to my peak ability. Terrific. That's the kind of self-talk, positive self-talk that we need as players, people, athletes going forward then again. The impact phase is the hardest one in my opinion. It's the one that I've found more difficult along the line. The athlete must learn to ignore negative situations and how could lead to aggression. Self-statements are also beneficial here. How can you do this? So I would say scenario-based learning. I would say put people into scenarios that are difficult for them, that they find difficult. Once you've done that, then I would say you're closer to where you'd be. So if we're getting players sent off when the referee makes a decision, let's train that. Let's go into training competitions, or let's go into training matches, training games. Referee makes a controversial decision. We have to just get on with it and get closer to it then again. That is where we're going to have to get with this in relation to referees, responding to referees, officials, coaching decisions. If you want to get better, you need to decrease the amount of times that you're going to make these errors. And of course, underneath it all, and I will always say this, of course, underneath it all, generally the players with the best players in terms of talent, physicality, genetics, coachability, etc., they will end up winning most games. But actually, there are things that we can do to get closer to our own unique individual peak performance. So that's where we need to aim at. We need to maybe say, okay, I don't need to worry so much in relation to, let's say, for example, the opposition. But if I can get better on this, and I know that that player is really good, if that player is really good at, hitting the ball by me and going in a 1v1 race, then what can I do to get myself closer to that? Work on my speed over maybe 5 yards. Okay, brilliant. What else can I do? Right, let's work on my positional sense. Let's work on my reading of the game. How do I read the game? What can I do to improve at reading the game? And then things then will lead us closer to becoming better in our 1v1 situations, for example. Now, the reflection phase is an important phase as well, and it's a phase that some athletes overdo. They fall into the paralysis by analysis phase, and we've all come across athletes like that who are almost probably too difficult on themselves, too hard on themselves. The perception of that would be, how do we get around that to make them better? better players, better people, better human beings, etc. The athlete should reflect on instances where they show self-control and remember these for the next occasion. And people will say it. People will say it, and they will be quite right in saying it quite often, that, we can never ever really mimic what happens in a game, in a training situation. Okay, there is an element to that. There has to be an element to that. Many things are different. Crowds are different. Maybe there's no official. There's no referee officially doing the game, let's say, for example. So let's put that out there, that we accept it. Okay, now once we've accepted that, the coach in this situation has a really prominent role. The coach in this situation has to learn a skill of being able to get what you do in training as close to game related behavior as you possibly can. As close as you possibly can. And that is what I'd be saying. That's why coaches often, we need to get the players better. Yes, accept that phase. We accept that. That's part A, and that's no problem with that. But as a sports psych who's working with coaches of different groups across different subsections of different sports, some to which I'm not versed with great skill, technical knowledge around it, but what I know is that we as coaches, practitioners, backroom staff, we need to take more accountability in how we improve at our role, or we improve at our job. How do we become better practitioners? How do we become better coaches? And it's not an easy thing to do. We can be quite defensive. If we get to a certain age, we might feel it's a little bit like we know all that we need to know. We might get professional accreditation, PhD, pro license, rugby stage 4, whatever it may be in terms of a coaching structure. But I don't think that we always need to be very cognizant, always need to be very aware that when we get to that phase, yes, that's a terrific phase to be at, but when we get to that phase, the important thing is that we realise learning does not stop at this phase. Yes, we've learned a lot. Yes, we've got great experience in life. Yes, we're closer to where we want to be in life, but actually we will need to continue to develop, grow and learn. And the reason why I say that is, and maybe a show of age here, to be honest, but when I say that, when I explain that, or when I speak to athletes in relation to this, I would say I'm of an age now where I probably know more than I've ever known. Okay, I probably know more now than I've ever known, but I actually realise that I actually know very little. So it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. Look that one up. The more we know, the more we realise that we actually don't know that much in general. So how do we always do that? And I think it's just about being in an environment where you're passionate to learn, being in an environment that's open to learning. And if you do that, I think it's really positive going forward for people then again. I think it's really, it can have really positive outcomes for people going forward then again. So this self-control of aggression is very, again, very important, right? Again, it's very important with this, okay? Really important how we do that and what way we do that as well. Okay, so that's my look upon it, the view that I have upon it. It might not be the same as yours, but again, this is based off the research done across sport, exercise and performance psychology. On to the next one then. If we were to look at clinical views, and if we were to go down the road of the clinician, it does change the lens quite obviously, because we have situations where aggression in sport can sometimes be almost accepted. Some people can almost accept aggressive acts within sport. Again, that's fine. Sometimes we say, the role of sport is an interesting one. If I was to walk onto the street with a friend of mine called John, and me and John were to start doing a boxing match, well, actually somebody could ring the police and say, listen, there's two people out there, they're assaulting each other and they probably need to be arrested. I mean, in most cases we probably would be, but in the situation then, if we decided to do the very same thing but we done it in a boxing ring inside a sports hall, chances are that would be accepted. So what we have here is we have these socially acceptable things, or we have things that are socially acceptable within sport, or the medium of sport, that we do not see as acceptable within everyday society. We do not see it as acceptable in everyday society. So therefore, there's questions around that concept within it as well, in my opinion. Okay? These clinical views then, we could use a general definition. aggression is a behaviour that's intended to harm others. Would that be a fair one? And then I'd ask you as a group now for maybe listening to 50 minutes of sport and exercise performance psychology theory on aggression. Is that, or does that cover all types of aggression? Does it cover every type of aggression? So, again, if we were to kind of slant it, just slightly ajar, slant it maybe in a little different way or different method, how would we describe what it is when we're looking at aggression from that clinical prospect, that clinical view? Then again, aggression is a social construct. It's an idea that has been created and accepted by people in society. So how do we define and describe it then? Well, we can look at its content, its form, its motivation, and the type of microaggressions as dimensions of the same concept, kind of like of the sides of a square. The one thing I would say here is that obviously you are probably all familiar and have come across ideas around little ideas around these kind of, I would say, modern deisms, for want of a better phrase, like these microaggression terms that we see. What are they really? Not really that big of an issue. We'll get close to looking at them now in a moment. We can use topologies as well, so categorical systems then to help us organise systematic classifications if we wish, in terms of trying to organise them that way as well. The typology or classifications of 1 to 4, like the first one that you'd always come across is this GAM or this GAM, this general aggression model, that's come about and that's spoken of really quite a lot. So aggression content, then we can organise aggressive behaviours and events into 3 content areas, the first of which is the physical aggression, intentionally causing harm to someone, body or property. So that's a physical aggression. It doesn't actually have to be that you're hitting the person themselves, but it can be physical aggression towards them or their property. You see it quite often, people who are having disagreements when they're in, let's say, a car. They get out and they might hit the person's car and get back into their own car. And they may see that then as what I would refer to or categorize as physical aggression, but in a little bit of a different way to the normal physical aggression that yourself or I might see as aggression in that way. Then again, so them elements for me are they important? They are important, but probably they aren't as important as them other big ones that I would see quite often, where people are actually physically abused or hit or touched or whatever it is, and that's even going a step back away from looking at even the other parts that we need to be kind of aware of as well, as when there's the physiological kind of abuse in sexual ways and the emotional abuse that happens that's connected to that physical abuse, that it can happen to people of all ages, I guess, as well. The verbal aggression, I can't imagine anybody who's of the age they are and sitting listening to a lecture in sport and exercise psychology has never had some sort of verbal aggression against them as a person, themselves or loved ones or people that's in their social circle, and it's just using communication to cause harm. And what we do, which is kind of sad in a way, but it's probably the reality behind it, is when we're having a disagreement or having an argument or a fight with somebody as well, the first thing that people will generally go to is the thing that hurts the person the most, or that is something that can cause harm or hurts to the person the most. And we can get caught in that without really knowing, or without really being aware of why we do them things, if that makes sense. So for me, this relational aggression, it's a different one. It's harming others by damaging their social networks. It's harming others by doing that then again. All right. Next part then is Boos's topology of the 8 different forms of aggression. So look, when we look at Boos's topology and we're trying to understand these 8 different types of it, it's very hard sometimes for us to understand this kind of structure that's in front of us if it's just solely done in writing. So the reason I put it in a table, and I hope that this isn't missed with everything that we're doing, the reason I do is to try and make it more interactive and more for you to understand how it's expressed. So if it's a really direct one, or is it indirect? Now, we can be direct both actively and we can do that both passively. So we can be very, very, very direct in what we're doing, okay? Or we can have this almost indirect element to it. We can also, with indirect and indirect, we can have an active stance on it, or we can have a very passive stance on it. So what is that referring to, or what does it mean? Let's have a little look then and examine that as well for ourselves. So if we have physical aggression, it could be active and passive when we're looking at the direct elements. If it's active, it tends to be hitting, stabbing, beating, shooting, all them other things that maybe fall into it as well. If it's passionate, or if it's passive, you might be actually just putting yourself into positioning your car to prevent someone else from changing lanes. So that's a passive type of physical one, because there's movement attached to it. Again, it's probably something you've seen quite often, road rage, etc. People will speak of when they hear this one. That's there as well. If we're still maintaining, if we're still exploring and developing and viewing indirect physical aggression, then we look at the active element first, cheating in a competition or hiring a hitman. Now, when I look at this, and I, don't get me wrong, I'm in a situation where I've been teaching buses topology for a while now. I always think they're a little bit different. They're a little bit different, cheating in a competition or hiring a hitman. I often found, well, listen, Bus, you might want to redevelop this and have a little more of a specific look at it, because to be honest, they're very different ends of the spectrum. But the passive one in this indirect form is refusing to stop the bleeding of another enemy soldier. Okay, so they do have some good examples within it that make sense, and that you could be passive but could be really, really aggressive towards somebody as well. So in a very passive nature, you could be doing that to the person then as well, and that could have a very detrimental effect. So we have the physical one now, and we've understood it, and we've got some development across that physical one. But the next one that we look at here is actually the verbal. And it's often sought as, or taught as, and sought after, in the sense that people think, well, you know what, it's the lesser of the two evils. I'm gonna make use decide that is physical aggression towards a person worse than verbal aggression. That's something that, if I gave you a couple of moments there to decide. Now, apologies, just taking a drink there. So we break it down into direct and indirect again. We have on the active side of the direct, we have put downs and insults. The passive is giving someone the silent treatment to punish that person. And then we have the indirect, which is active or passive also. The active side of that is spreading mean rumors or negative gossip and failing to defend someone who is being accused unfairly. So we can also recognize motivations for aggression, why it happened. So we can have a hostile reactive aggression. It can be really impulsive. It can be emotion-based reactions to perceived threats. So it might not even be something that's directly said about you, but it can be something that you perceive as a threat. And even at that, if we perceive it as a threat, then it can have a detrimental effect on our well-being, our health, our ideas, our concept around what it is. So therefore, we need to maybe examine that. And maybe we do need to explore it to understand the realms of it and the scope of it, and that's okay as well. We can do that. And then we have the instrumental proactive aggression, a thoughtful reason-based decision to harm others to gain resources such as territory, money, self-esteem, or social status. That's the big part of it then again that people would probably have in terms of their understanding and levels of consciousness then again. Okay, that's where I would be at it. There are these thoughtful, reason-based decisions to harm others. So, taking money away from them, creating issues that might hurt their self-esteem. Then again, handy little diagram actually, for want of a better phrase, a handy little diagram, a diagram that kind of clearly goes through what we're talking about when we're looking at the motivational topology of aggression. What is the elements that have on either extremes? We have hostile reactive, and as we suggested just privately or priorly, we have instrumental proactive aggression. And under the hostile reactive aggression, we have impulsive emotion based. So we've an example, a rage at lover's infidelity. So again, that's something that could be very clear. very, very visible, very obvious that there's rage towards the person or what's happened with the person in relation to this, their infidelity per se, for example. And then we have obviously gossiping about a colleague to avoid them as competition. So, look, well, just to let you know, like, I know they're up for the same job that I'm up for, but just thought I'd let you know that they haven't really done much work in the last couple of weeks. I've been watching them and they're not great. Now, a lot of the time these thinly veiled pieces of information that management will receive, they're very clear what the motivation is from the person, particularly if there is a role or a responsibility or a job coming up for them. Then again, if we look at some of these microaggressions, and these microaggressions that seem to have, I would say they've kind of lurked around and they're now prominent, to which they weren't always prominent in the past, and they've become part of modern society, and we speak about them much more often than we have in the past. They're subtle behaviours or insults that marginalise or negatively stereotype group members. They include micro insults, micro assaults, and micro validations. So, micro invalidations, micro invalidations. Apologies on that one. Okay, so this is the main because I would say, for me, I think it is important. I think it is important as well. So the micro insults are rude statements that demean a person's heritage. Let's say, for example, oh yeah, sure, the Irish, drink and alcohol and everything else and all. Now that's one of them things that's commonly said, and most people actually wouldn't become offended by it, but it is and could be considered as a micro insult. A micro assault then is behaviours meant to psychologically harm or insult somebody. Micro invalidation are statements or behaviours that invalidate the target's feelings on an individual or group level. There is controversy over the characteristics, effects, and interventions of microaggressions. And you may say, where have I seen these before, or what place have I seen them? You guys have probably seen microaggressions while you're in class, while you're out on the pitch, while you're performing in a musical based show, because you're constantly working within a group or within a team. Then again, so think about the last time you experienced aggression. What was the type of aggression you experienced? Was it physical or verbal? Was it direct, indirect? Was it active or was it passive? Was the aggression hot or cold? In other words, was it motivated by frustration, hostile or reactive, or was it instrumentally based, i.e. obtaining status or self-esteem? Did it possibly involve a microaggression? General aggression model, then again, the theory that aggression is a developmental process including biological responses to the environment, cognitive processes, and decisions about how to behave. 3 planes of development for an episode of aggression: inputs, roots, outcomes. So again, 3 planes of development for an episode of aggression: inputs, roots, outcomes. So what's the input? Where is the root of it coming from? What's the motivation behind it? Again, so that's a big part of it for us as well. Okay. Now, the next one is this kind of look at it. What are the inputs, what are the roots, and what are the outcomes? Okay, so Anderson and Bushman looked at it. So phase 1 of the GAN focuses on the personological, the situational input variables that increase or decrease the likelihood of aggressive behavior by influence a person's present internal state, affect, cognitions, arousals. Roots then, they tend to be present internal state, the roots through which inputs variables influence outcomes, the effect, the cognition, and the arousal. Together, these 3 roots comprise an individual's present internal state, which encourages or discourages aggressive behavior by affecting appraisal and decision processes. Input variables can influence mood and emotions. For example, personality variables such as trait hostility are positively related to state hostility. Situational variables such as pain can increase state hostility and anger. And uncomfortable temperatures are also associated with small increases in general negative affect and large increases in aggressive affect. The outcomes then of the event occur through the examination of appraisal and decision process that lead to thoughtful or impulsive actions. The initial step of appraisal and decision process is immediate appraisal. Immediate appraisal occurs automatically, that is, spontaneously, unconsciously, and with relatively little or no effort. When we see these, we often say effective, anger, goal, retaliation, intention, intent to retaliate. When we say intention to retaliate, I would say to harm, but we've kind of, we're trying to be careful when we're using the word harm and what are the associations to it. The selected action, however, varies greatly from person to person depending on the individual's personality, i.e. social learning history, the current accessibility of various knowledge structures present in the internal states. Outcomes, so actions, decisions are made based upon available resources. If resources, time and cognitive capacity are sufficient, if the outcome of immediate appraisal is both important and unsatisfying, the person will probably engage in more effortful reappraisal, which involves seeking out alternative views. If any of the above criteria are not met, the person will carry out an impulsive action which can be aggressive or non-aggressive depending on the content of the immediate appraisal. Okay, it would be across the concept of that immediate appraisal. Okay, and that will bring us to this. As you can see, it's the JAM. It's developed and has developed for quite some time now. And really, we've gone through most of, not all of it there with the theory before it. But this is just how it might be laid out to give you some thoughtful understanding of where it is. Okay, so the persistence of aggression, I would say the persistence of aggression is an interesting concept because, why has it, why or how has it, I would say lasted or maintained during the test of time per se. For example, it's been around for a hell of a long time and probably will maintain and still, for me anyway, it will still probably be in a situation that it is around for a long time to come because of its historical underpinnings, i.e., the need for survival as human beings is really important, and probably the need for survival as human beings maybe never would have occurred or could not have occurred only for the fact that we've got to a stage where we've maybe not needed to be constantly doing that. We do survive and we do have to survive, and we do it in different ways maybe in 2023 than maybe we would have done in times and days gone past as well, then again going forward. So look, war is something that's evolved as well, very much a hands-on type of thing, or needed to be a hands-on type of thing. It's gone down a different route now, which again is probably a route that we're probably aware of, that most wars are done in terms of technology or technological advancements, as opposed to us maybe looking at it from a different perspective, which would be, the old adage of kind of, war hand on hand, excuse the phrase, antiquated phrase that it is, but speaking about, man to man, kind of such an outdated phrase as well then. So the next part that we look at then is this kind of tends to escalate. So escalation of aggression effect is something that we can see if there is an episode or an incident and it's only grown in nature and it's not kind of I would say pulled apart, a very Irish term there that we have, but if it's not pulled apart, the escalation of the aggression can go from some of these microaggressions, as we suggested, maybe some of these indirect aggressions, maybe some of these direct aggressions, passive and active, start to grow and become much more apparent and much more consistent in their behavior. And this is done on these stages of what they call stages of provocation. And these stages of provocation are important, okay? Stage one, the provocation doesn't lead to a particular aggressive response. It might lead to, a look, a feeling, but not necessarily an aggressive act towards the person per se. What it might lead to, what it might bring us towards is something a little bit different, okay? And it might lead us to this stage too, where the experience angrier thoughts, mild psychological and emotional arousal. The third stage is based perceptions and, biased receptions and overreactions, surge of adrenaline, as we know, coursing through our veins, the rage that occurs, and the explosive physical and verbal attacks that occur then after. Now, this is the last piece of our journey here today when we study aggression from the clinical perspective. And as you can imagine, with most things clinical, there is elements that are very, very important. And we always love the ones that we can say, oh,
let's become cherry pickers again. Let's pick the best parts and see how can we apply this to sport. And that's what we do with lots of psychology, because really sports and exercise psychology is not a new phenomenon. By no means is it a new phenomenon. By no means is it a new aspect or concept or anything. But actually the research in clinical or applied based psychology has been going on for a lot longer. So what we tend to do a lot of the time is we tend to look at that research and we put in a little cherry picker to try and decide what can we apply to sport. For you guys, you'll probably be doing an examination. You may in fact be asked about the general aggression model, the GAM model. You may in fact be asked around Zilleman's stages of provocation. So Zilleman's stages of provocation, again, as we suggested, they come in 3 different stages. Stage 1, okay, a cognitive base, an emotional arousal, and then a behavioral base. Stage 1, as we see it from a cognitive perspective, is that they are irritated, is that they are capable of good judgment at this stage. But actually what happens then is, when it gets to stage 2, they become angrier thoughts and less empathetic. Finally, when it gets to stage 3, as we suggested, these biased conclusions with no empathy and the illusions of power. We feel like we can tackle anything, whether it's 2, 3, 4 people in some circumstances. From an emotional point of view, we go from low to moderate and moderate to high. And when we reach high, we're probably close to that extreme nature. Not only do we do that, but we get to stage 3 and then we are at the extremely high behavior. When we get to behavior as a single construct, we look at stages 1, 2, and 3 again, and cautiously assertive with self-control is what we're assisting. But when we reach stage 3, we become strongly assertive, unyielding, and then there's a hostile nature. But when we reach stage 3, the reality behind it, the nature of it then, is it's impulsive, explosive, and irresponsible. Impulsive, explosive, and irresponsible. There's a question. There is a question that I would often put out to students and ask that question, and maybe kind of hint towards it then again, of what it is and how these things are done in relation to these type of concepts that come up. Is aggression actually becoming, are we becoming less aggressive as a species? You know, maybe that's something that I'm going to allow you as a class, you as a group, you as an individual, be able to learn and understand. And when you do learn and understand about that, it's probably going to help you become closer to where you want to be, what you want to do, and how you want to do it then again. That will definitely be an element that's important leading into it then again. Leading into it then again. That is a key for us then as well. So, what do we do there? How do we do it again? And I would say, let's push, let's lead, let's get closer to some of them answers that we have then again. So what is the statistical surprise is that there appears to be a persistent long-term decline in worldwide violence, possibly related to increased human intelligence. What are the other reasons? What are the other reasons so there is, or why there is a decrease? Again, that side of it is an important one as well. It's really important, and a good feature as well. Okay, so next part is this one where we look at homicide rates throughout Europe, and the declining rate of them as well. The declining rates of these homicides that are there from the 1300s up to 2010. I always am fascinated, always fascinated looking at some of them and how they went really high. I look at maybe that one for, let's say, England, and I'm looking at the 14 to 1500s, and maybe one of the historical buffs who's listening to this will be able to tell me why that is, if there's some particular battle that they may have had across some of their specialized empire that they had. As they say, the sun never sets on the British Empire, as was one of the phrases back then. But again, if you look at it, generally has decreased massively, and reasons why it's decreased massively as well there as well. So, why are humans aggressive? For me, just so many reasons, multitude of reasons, multiple reasons, multiple outcomes, multiple possible situations, or positions why people, are aggressive. Human beings are aggressive. Historically speaking, hunter-gatherer man. Again, there we go, hunter-gatherer man. We use the term man in a very general. Human is what I would prefer all of these terms to say at this day and age in terms of equality. So biological influences. So there is genetic determinism. The idea that genetic influences alone determines the outcomes, most likely traits. It's nature v nurture kind of concept. I'm not always a believer that you can do that. You can really only have yourself firmly placed in the middle of that fence, as people often say to me. You're sitting on the fence in relation. You will have to be somewhere in the middle to be as accurate as you possibly can when we're having the debate of nature versus nurture then again. So the 4 biological responses to threat: fight, flight, freeze, and befriend, in most of the cases now, so they could have a nice phrases around that. And the phrase, it kind of escapes me at the moment almost, but having that beautiful fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So again, fawning to people who are like that way, and sometimes we would say maybe being overly nice to them, a kiss up, etc. That kind of concept around it as well. So them things could come into play there, and they definitely play a role. And if we look at them 4 biological responses in detail, you'll find more of it. What are the biological influences? Well, actually now we're in a position where we can say, right, we've all of this anecdotal research, we've all of these beautiful questionnaires and psychometric testing. Let's go down the objective route. We can look at things in an objective way, and now for the first time probably in a long time, we've had this ability to do that. So actually, low heart rates tells us that it's a strong predictor of delinquency, of low resting heart rate at age 11. Less sensitive to negative consequences of behavior or environment. So again, you guys have probably watched plenty of documentaries or seen sports where people are seen as cold, but this might be a reference to why that is. Then again, of course, that's referring to kind of cold-blooded killers in them sense. But this is an interesting one because actually, it's telling us that it's a possible link to antisocial personality disorder. So that APD again is something that you could go searching for, find some nice information, and go down a nice rabbit hole and find yourself gone for a couple of weeks in terms of the information that you'll get with it. So that is there as well. So the low heart rate reflects autonomic under-arousal. Low autonomic arousal, like boredom, it leads to sensation seeking and risk taking in an attempt to increase stimulation and arousal levels then again. So I love learning. I love learning all the time. I love how I was in a classroom last year, and for the last 14 years I've been teaching around sport, exercise, psychology, with the concepts of aggression and how it's applied. And here, sitting in a classroom last year, a student says to me, is that people are getting bored? You hear these people doing things for sensation seeking. Of course it is. That's relating back to that then again. And the research that we actually conduct, and some of the research that we have in relation to sensation seeking activities, skydiving, and all of them type of activities that would be seen as extreme sports, in most cases what we'll see is then people would be categorized or would be put into that situation of being at the kind of low heart rate, which is reflecting that under arousal effect that we can have as human beings then again. So biological influences then again, we think of alcohol. I was kidding, being a little bit facetious earlier when we spoke about alcohol and people of Irish descent, but actually when we think about alcohol, this inhibition hypothesis, the idea that alcohol interferes with the brain's ability to suppress violent behavior by lowering anxiety and harming the ability to accurately assess a situation. It affects of alcohol on the brain during disagreements, strong predictor of physical. And look, that's the first part to go. When we're talking about, alcohol and what's occurring with alcohol or how it's occurring with alcohol, let's say, for example, the first part that we often get close to, and trying to understand is that frontal part of our brain is the first part that's affected when we take alcohol on board. And if we go all the way back to lecture 1, we looked at all the different lobes, the occipital, the temporal, the parietal, and we also looked at the frontal lobe. But in that frontal lobe, we've seen the prefrontal cortex. And when we explore the prefrontal cortex, we know that one of the main things that it does for us is it allows us to have good decision making, or it's involved with our decision making. It's involved with our logic. It's involved with our planning. So if that goes a little bit wiry, a little bit wishy-washy, then you can understand why we're making, or that we may make poor decisions then again. Testosterone levels influences aggression then again. So the stronger the connection among non-human animals, gender differences of course, because males produce in general much more testosterone than females do. Normal, nothing different there, let's say, for example. And then aggression peaks in men and women in the 20s. So there's all these physiological changes. There's almost the phenomenon of completing the video game, that, you know, you get to that stage. Oh, now I'm allowed to drink. Oh, now I'm allowed to live by myself. Oh, now and all of these other sub parts that we feel is that we've got to the end of the road, and that we've completed or got close to completing something, like, you know, that part of our life that gives us this kind of idea that we are now ready to take on the world with everything that it has. So, gender differences then. It appears to be the case that men are more aggressive than women. Hormonal explanation: men have higher testosterone. And Bernard et al. In 1993, men with higher levels of testosterone were more likely to show aggression. Gender socialization then, Brockford et al. In 1992, while boys show a higher level of physical aggression, girls show a higher level of indirect aggression. So, look, the nature of what we can do with indirect aggression, comments, you know, rumor mills, rumor mongering, all of them things seems to be coming across in some of that kind of, what I would say, anecdotal, very preliminary pieces of research that's taken place then again. So it's not quite empirical, and it's not quite where it should be in relation to that, if that makes sense. So it's not where it should be, and it certainly needs work if it's going to get to or get closer to where it should be. Okay. Right, so next part of it is this group differences in aggression, the culture of honor. So we look at different cultures around the world, and we think, you know, are they more predisposed to aggression, or are we, and what's the reasons why we are, and, you know, why am I acting the way I am? Is it something that I've learned from my parents, from my dad, from my mum? Is that where we're at with this, or is there a different reason altogether, or is there a potential difference altogether? And what we see here is that in cultures where individuals, especially men, tend to perceive insults as a threat to their masculinity, they often engage in aggression. So it's promoted by personal and cultural values, and physical aggression ensues as a response to threats of their masculinity. So what about sports culture? I think if we look at sports culture in general, it's rife with that masculinity, and in most cases toxic masculinity. You know, it's very, very rare. It's not as rare as it used to be, but it's still very, very rare when a professional athlete playing at any real consideration of media spotlight, etc., can come out and actually say that they are of, let's say, homosexual. They're a homosexual, and if they say that, then there's all sorts of connotations that's applied to it. Then again, it is changing. It's taking its time to change, but it's changing. Now, values and honor of culture. When we look at these values and honors of culture, then again, what we have here is a good description and explanation of it. So, is this not what most men are taught everywhere? Masculine courage. Men should be able to take on pain. Pride in their manhood. Socialization. Men would honor stand up to bullies. Virtue. Fighting is admirable if done out of honor. Protection. Men should protect women. Provocation and insults. Men should not accept insults. And family and community bonds is a man's first priority. So, look, you can say what you want, but do not in any way respect me or disrespect me, my family, or my community. And that is where actually you'll find that it's kind of, it does lead, most certainly, I would say, I was going to say potentially, but I would say most certainly it does lead to that negative kind of outcomes where we see 2, maybe 3, 4 people in a group having a disagreement, an argument, and falling out then because of it then again. Situational influences on aggression. situational influence on aggression. Situation 1, war and hysteria and moral panic. Situation 2, model aggressive role models, the Boberall studies which we spoke of. Situation 3, media violence. And then situational aggression, environmental cues. The GAM model theory accounts for environmental cues that promote aggression, but actually looking at the other sides of it then with the influential ones as well. How can we manage or reduce aggression? Catharsis, we did explain that, some of the research in sport is telling us, yeah, okay, it gives us a nice understanding, it gives us a nice base, but it actually doesn't really answer some of the deeper ones, the deeper philosophical questions that we may have in relation to aggression, or why we act the way we do. And catharsis, popular and dangerous belief, increase in danger and aggression from catharsis, so it includes violent acts, ranting, venting, and violent games. How can we manage or reduce it? Revenge is sweet, but only briefly, teaching the transactional aspect of emotional states. Stoicism, so being able to be at peace with yourself maybe will lead to greater cultural or peace as possible. Again, we will lead to this, and this is actually going to go through different cultures, which I will say to you as you can go through in your own time, as it doesn't feature on any of the test procedures or anything. But I thought, we mentioned the differences in culture so often when we speak of aggression or aggression in sport or clinical based practices or applied settings, but it's very rare that we allow for people to understand these cultural different aspects across peaceful societies then again. How can we manage and reduce, like constructivist journalism, promoting cultures of peace, instead of every time you switch on the TV, more bad news, more issues, look, don't want to get into it now, but like some of the kind of stuff that was happening maybe within the Iraqi war, where people were pro of some news channels because of the way they were, stereotypically or biased promoting and reporting on the war. And that leads to the end of the lecture today on aggression in sport. Remember, when you're looking at aggression on sport, that it's important that you have these concepts based off hostile, instrumental and assertive behaviours. You will have to understand Silva's model. It will come up again. You will need to know the theories of the frustration aggression hypothesis. You'll probably need to know the updated version of it or the revised model. And then you're probably going to need to be able to look at some of the other theories that's based in there then again. That we have, like the catharsis hypothesis. We've had a really good detailed analysis of the GAM model, the general aggression model, and we've also been able to look at Zillman's provocation model. And if you've covered all of them, then you're in a really good position. Thank you for your time and have a lovely day.